one thing that I'm sure that I've given credit to a few times, and definitely in some upcoming episodes, especially a certain one in season 5. But I always enjoy hearing the inside looks, of course, from different writers and different actors, of course, their backstory behind certain things. Peter Melman, though, I feel like always has a lot of really, really good backstories. And this was a big Peter Melman episode because you ever hear the phrase of, you just throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks, basically, which sometimes that could be like a disadvantage, but sometimes it can work out very good. This episode of Seinfeld, The Implant, had like a bunch of small, little scene ideas that Peter Melman had that he just put together basically, and it turned out to be a pretty darn good episode. I really like this episode called The Implant. The big story, of course, was instantly introduced in the first scene of this episode where Jerry and Elaine are at the health club, and Elaine sees Jerry talking to a woman whose name is Sidra, and he went out with her on one date, and he's getting ready to go out for a second date on an upcoming Thursday. Of course, the big thing, of course, they notice is the fact that she has very big breasts. And of course, Peter Melman's idea was for Jerry and Elaine to have a conversation where, they're talking about, how great she is, and then, of course, obviously noticing a woman with, with big breasts, and Elaine just goes, come on, they're fake, just obviously not mentioning, not having Jerry trying to incite it, but just mentioning immediately, it's they're fake, basically, and just continuing on with another conversation. Even though, of course, that gets Jerry stirred up, are they real, are they fake, what are they, whatnot. So, of course, that happens, and of course, he makes some comment about, well, maybe if you go to the sauna and see her, maybe you'll be able to figure out if they are real or not. Which Elaine eventually, there is a scene where Elaine is in there and has her, and we don't hear her talking, but we hear her thoughts, and basically, for what she sees, she still thinks that they're fake. Of course, when casting Sidra, they had find not just an attractive actress, but one that's also funny and just fits at the program basically. And of course, that person ended up being Terry Hatcher, which I think she did an excellent job portraying the character. Being very not so much someone who wants it to be known to the world. Hey, my breasts are large or whatnot, but she just feels like she's very modest and very she's not someone that just lets it out there basically is what I'm trying to say. But of course like Peter Melman says, they had a story like The Contest where they basically were going off of basically a story about who can go the longest without playing around with themselves. And we also had the outing episode as well, where they obviously had subjects that you gotta be careful not to come across insulting or promoting something that people would take as in a negative way, but also trying to make a comedy out of it, the dark humor side. So that and then it's why not go this route at the same time. And then, of course, Kramer also, which this was, I don't know if it was the Peter Melman idea or not, but Kramer thinks he saw Salman Rusty, or whatever his name is, the writer. He thinks he saw him at the health club, which later Kramer does meet him inside the sauna, and he introduced himself as Sal Bass, and which Kramer still is convinced it's Salman Rusty as well, but he's trying to convince everybody else that that's the case. He's also getting ready to go on a vacation as well, which, because of that, it caused the breakup with Jerry and Sidra later in the episode, even though it's technically the second time. But the story goes on, but to basically not go in complete order with this episode, eventually, though, what happens is when Elaine is pretty convinced that, Sidra's boobs aren't real, that she thinks that they're implants, Jerry calls off the date with her. And apparently he had told Sidra that he was going back to his old girlfriend because she's mentally ill and he wants to be there for her. So it's not fair to her, basically. Which, Sidra, didn't take too lately. how on earth did Jerry reconcile with her after what happened? Of course, that caused him to reschedule the second date. In the end, I have no clue, and how he made a horrible mistake. But what happened was Elaine was in the sauna again, and she was making conversation with Sidra and her friend. Elaine gets up to go shake Sidra's hand, but she loses her balance and she falls right into Sidra's chest, and she touched them. And she was able to tell Jerry that she's pretty sure that they're real, which, makes Jerry go scrambling back to Sidra, and he gets the second date with her. And they're sitting on the couch, and then he randomly starts talking about, well, also there's this thing where with Jerry and George talk about how they prefer sitting on certain sides of the couch when sitting on the couch with a woman. So there was that, and then Jerry starts a conversation about Jay Mansfield having big breasts and whatnot, and he's trying to steer it towards he wants to basically her to say whether they're real or not. And just when it seems like they're just about to start making moves on each other, that's when Kramer's knocking on the door saying that it's an emergency, which, the whole idea of things being an emergency, it was kind of an ongoing thread because of another story that happened earlier in the episode. Again, I know that I'm kind of going a little out of order, but it's just how it fell in place for this episode. But then Kramer knocking on the door, says it's an emergency, and it says he wants to borrow his bathing suit. Of course, Jerry's going, why don't I want my boys mixing in with yours down there? So finally he gives in. And then Elaine happens to drop in, and of course Sidra knows Elaine as the woman who fell into her chest in the sauna. And then Kramer made some comment about, then Elaine tries to cover up by saying she's trying to help Kramer, trying to help Kramer pack for his trip. And he made some comment about, oh yeah, this is when you and Elaine did that one time or something like that, which obviously did not help Jerry's case at all. He knew he was doomed. And then Sidra gets up to go to leave, and he stretches out, so he's like, so where were we? Sidra goes, I was just leaving. And then he goes, oh great, and she basically is convinced that Jerry had sent Elaine into the sauna to figure out whether if Sidra's breasts were real or fake. And then he's saying it was an accident, and then Sidra says, I think you were both mentally ill. Now, earlier in the episode, originally it was supposed to say just, they're real. But then Elaine adds in the line, they're real and they're spectacular. So Sidra walks out, and then she opens the door back in. She slides back in, kind of like flings her hair out of her face, which made it even more perfect, and her facial expressions. She goes, and by the way, they're real and they're spectacular. And he's like, and of course, he was so close to getting it, so it all blew up in his face, and she just makes an exit. That, of course, was another great example of another great exit, because obviously, it made me think back to the Cheever letters, whenever Jerry made that panty remark, and he didn't want Elaine to know that he had said that to her assistant, which he had a one-night fling with, basically. But he didn't think she knew. But at the end of the episode, Elaine basically says, I'm going home to get these new panties that my mother has all laid out for me. And it's kind of like, that line where it was like, you want to know the answer, of course, but then, of course, Sidra just says exactly what was said before. It was like foreshadowing to what she says. But that was the main story of this episode. The other, of course, with Kramer seeing about, Sal Bass and whatnot. The other story that we go back to, again, George was on his 9th date with this woman named Betsy. And he hadn't really made a move yet, because I guess he apparently was sitting on the wrong side of the couch. It's not his comfortable side. So when he finally was there, but Betsy said she was hard of hearing in the ear closest to George where he was sitting, George started trying to make a move on her. And the phone rings, and she says it might be an emergency, and George is like, how could it be an emergency? And of course, ends up being an emergency because Betsy gets a call saying her Aunt Claire had passed away, which she's all in tears. So George, which seems a little out of character, wants to be, the caring boyfriend and whatnot, wants to, go accompany her. But also, because this comes from another story from Peter Melman, George was trying to get a flight to Detroit on the cheap. So he's trying to get like like a death in the family discount, basically. And Peter Melman one time did try to fraudulently get a discount on a cheap for a flight because American Airlines had canceled his bonus miles. And so he literally was trying to use fraudulent information for a death in the family as an excuse to get a discount. And there's a line there where George literally says something like, "You're going to tell my friend whose father, who's been married for 44 years, has lost his wife," and something like that. And, Peter Melman apparently literally did say that to the ticket agent. So that was a good George line to use. But of course, they said he can get the discount, but he had to provide a copy of the death certificate, which George was trying to find while he was at the wake in Detroit. And things are going pretty good. People seem to like George, but then of course comes another small little idea that Peter Melman had about a time where he was at a party and he noticed that someone had double dipped a potato chip. So he thought, okay, double dip, that's pretty good. And he added that in there, which of course led to the argument between George and Betsy's brother Timmy getting into an argument, because as Timmy would say, you double dip the chip. You dip the chip, you take a bite, and you dipped again. That's like putting your whole mouth into it, which George didn't seem to care, which led to one last small little idea that Peter Melman had also, was a fight at a funeral. And then George goes to double dip again, and Timmy grabs his arm and they get into a big fight, and basically Betsy tells George doesn't want to see her more, and his family basically kicked him out. So he was back at the airport trying to get his flight home, but of course he's told again that he would need to show a copy of the death certificate. George, being the one trying to come up with lies all the time, lies that there was a fire and he lost the death certificate. So he tries to get away by showing a photo of him sitting by the casket. Like a very horrible looking photo of him at all, but basically he's like, nice try, you're not getting away with that. And unfortunately, he did not get the discount, and he lost the girl. And he lost it because of him double dipping a potato chip. But this is a couple of really, smooth, just ideas that just fit very well into one episode. I mean, most of them, of course, were George ideas, but they all worked out. Again, and Terry Hatcher was a great choice for the actress supposed to play the one with the bigger breasts, but yet was very modest and what wasn't someone who seemed like she was out there trying to show off the guys basically. But then of course all those George storylines, such as him trying to get to Detroit on the cheap, and then it just all blown up his face completely, and him trying to get the death certificate, and then of course trying to cover up for it by showing a photo of him sitting next to the casket. It was priceless. Very good episode for sure. The Implant. I believe the next one, I think, is, let me see here, because I have it behind me here. It is, okay, it's a handicap spot. It's the handicap spot, and then after the handicap spot, it's the Junior Mint. Then the Smelly Car, then the 2-part pilot finale, then that's it for season 4. So I will see you guys next in the handicap spot. It is also best known for the first appearance of another Costanza. Who is that, of course? We will talk about that next. So guys, what are your thoughts on the Implant episode? Leave your thoughts down in the comment section below, and be sure as always to slap a like on the video, and subscribe for more content to my channel, and follow me on Twitter at DemandAirBoy93. Until then guys, I'll check it out. I'll see you all later. Have a great rest of your night, and peace out everybody. Yeah.